The warning came too late. Jake Martinez had already grabbed her wrist to pull her back from the collapsing corridor. The explosion from the sabotaged reactor sent shockwaves through the diplomatic vessel, and pieces of the ceiling were raining down around them. He didn't think. He just acted. The alien princess froze. Her violet eyes went wide, and her silver skin began to glow with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The ethereal robe she wore started to shimmer and change color, cycling through shades Jake had never seen before. "You fool," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce. "Do you know what happens if you touch me?" Jake released her immediately, stepping back. "Sorry, Your Highness. The debris was about to crush you." Princess Lyria of the Sindari Empire stared at her wrist where his fingers had been. The glow was spreading up her arm now, intricate patterns appearing on her skin like living tattoos. She looked terrified and furious at the same time. "We need to move," Jake said, ignoring whatever taboo he'd just broken. The ship was tearing itself apart. Through the viewport, he could see the other human delegates scrambling toward the escape pods. This was supposed to be a peaceful summit between Earth and the Sindari Empire. Someone had other plans. "You don't understand," Lyria said, still staring at her arm. "My people, we don't touch outsiders. Ever. There are reasons." "Great! Add it to the list of human diplomatic failures," Jake muttered, grabbing an emergency kit from the wall panel. "But right now, we survive first, and I'll apologize later." Another explosion rocked the ship. This one was closer. The lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency red illumination that made everything look like a nightmare. Lyria made a decision. She grabbed Jake's arm, and this time the contact was deliberate. The glow intensified, and Jake felt something surge through him. It wasn't electricity, but it was energy of some kind, warm and strange and utterly alien. "This way," she said, pulling him toward a service hatch he hadn't noticed. "The main escape routes are compromised. I know another way." They ran through cramped maintenance tunnels, the princess moving with unexpected grace despite her elaborate clothing. Behind them, secondary explosions continued to tear through the vessel. Jake's emergency training kicked in, his mind cataloging the sounds and trying to estimate how much time they had. "Who did this?" he asked as they climbed down a vertical shaft. "Your guess is as valuable as mine," Lyria replied. "But someone wants this alliance to fail. Someone powerful enough to bypass Sindari security and plant explosives throughout this ship." They reached a small hangar bay. 3 compact escape craft sat in their docks, untouched by the chaos above. Lyria moved to the nearest one and placed her still glowing hand on the access panel. The door hissed open. "Get in," she ordered. Jake hesitated at the threshold. "What about the others? The other delegates? They have their escape pods. We have this." She looked at him with those alien eyes, and for the first time Jake saw something beyond her royal bearing. Fear. "Please, we need to launch now or we both die here." He climbed aboard. The craft was designed for Sindari physiology. Everything slightly too large or too small for human comfort. Lyria sealed the hatch and moved to the pilot station. "Strap in," she said, her fingers dancing across controls that looked more like musical instruments than a cockpit interface. The escape craft launched just as the diplomatic vessel's reactor went critical. Through the rear viewport, Jake watched the massive ship tear itself apart in a bloom of fire and debris. Somewhere in that chaos were people he knew, people who trusted that this summit would be safe. Lyria piloted them away from the destruction with practiced skill. But she was still glowing. The patterns on her skin had spread to cover her entire visible body, pulsing in rhythm with her breathing. "So," Jake said, breaking the heavy silence, "are you going to tell me what happens now that I've touched you?" The princess was quiet for a long moment, her attention focused on navigating through the debris field. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "We're bonded now, whether either of us wanted it or not." Jake felt his stomach drop. "Bonded? What does that mean?" "It means Lyria said, turning to face him with an expression that mixed anger, fear, and something else he couldn't identify, that for better or worse, your fate and mine are now intertwined. And there are people in my empire who would kill us both for what just happened. 3 Sindari warships were approaching fast, and they were powering weapons. Those are Imperial Guard vessels, Lyria said, her voice tight. They're not coming to rescue us. Jake leaned forward, studying the tactical display even though he couldn't read the Sindari symbols. Can we outrun them? Not in this craft. She made rapid adjustments to their course, diving toward a nearby asteroid field. But I know these systems better than they think I do. I wasn't always a princess sitting in palaces. The first weapons burst came close enough to shake their small craft. Lyria threw them into a spinning dive that would have made any human pilot proud. They plunged into the asteroid field, weaving between tumbling rocks the size of buildings. "Why are your own ships shooting at us?" Jake demanded, gripping his restraints as another near miss sent them careening sideways. "Because they detected the bond," Lyria said through gritted teeth. "The energy signature I'm emitting now, it's unmistakable." She rolled the craft inverted, using a large asteroid for cover. "To them, I'm contaminated. A security risk. That's insane. That's Sindari law." She pushed the engines harder, and warning lights began to flash across the console. "For 10,000 years, we've maintained genetic purity, no mixing with other species. No exceptions. Not even for royalty. Especially not for royalty." Jake processed this as another weapons burst shattered an asteroid to their left. "So what? They'd rather kill you than let you live, bonded to a human? They'd rather kill us both and prevent a scandal." Lyria's hands moved in a blur across the controls. "But I didn't survive the Imperial Court politics by being easy to kill." She brought them through a narrow canyon and a massive asteroid, emerging on the far side with the warships momentarily out of position. Ahead, Jake saw something that looked like a natural formation, but the sensor readings suggested otherwise. "What is that?" he asked. "Old mining station. Abandoned centuries ago." Lyria adjusted their approach vector. "Also happens to be where I stashed an emergency ship during my last visit to this sector." "You planned for this?" "I planned for everything." She gave him a sidelong glance, and despite the circumstances, there was a hint of a smile. Except for stubborn human delegates who don't know not to touch alien royalty. They landed inside the hollowed-out asteroid with the warships closing in fast. Lyria shut down all systems immediately, plunging them into darkness and silence. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in the sudden quiet. "They'll scan this rock," he whispered. "Not if we're lucky." Lyria's glowing patterns provided the only light, casting strange shadows in the cramped cabin. "The mineral composition interferes with most sensors. We just need to wait." Minutes crawled by. Jake could hear the distant hum of the warships passing nearby, their search patterns methodical and thorough. His training told him to stay calm, to trust in the plan. But this was so far beyond anything he'd trained for. Lyria's glow was fading slightly, the patterns becoming less vivid. She was breathing carefully, clearly concentrating on something. "The bond," Jake said quietly. "What exactly does it do?" "Later," she replied, not looking at him. "If we survive the next 10 minutes, I'll explain everything." The warship engines grew louder. One of them was passing directly overhead. Jake held his breath, irrationally worried that even that small sound might give them away. The ship passed. The sounds faded. They waited another 20 minutes before Lyria risked powering up a minimal sensor array. "They're gone," she said, her shoulders sagging with relief. Moved on to the next search grid. She led him deeper into the abandoned station, her natural luminescence lighting the way. The place was a maze of old mining equipment and collapsed tunnels, but Lyria moved through it like she'd been there yesterday. They found her hidden ship in a sealed hangar bay that still had atmosphere. It was smaller than Jake expected, sleek and dark, with none of the ornate decorations that marked official Sindari vessels. "Personal craft," Lyria explained, palming the access panel. "Bought with my own money, registered under a fake identity. The Imperial family doesn't know it exists." "You're full of surprises," You have to be when you're 47th in line for the throne. She climbed aboard and gestured for him to follow. Far enough down that you're not important, close enough that you're still a target for political games. The interior was comfortable, designed for long-range travel. Lyria moved to the cockpit while Jake secured himself in the co-pilot seat, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. "Where are we going?" he asked. Lyria pulled up a star chart, her glowing fingers leaving trails across the holographic display. "Somewhere neither Earth nor the Sindari Empire has jurisdiction, a neutral station on the frontier. And then, we figure out what comes next." She initiated the launch sequence, and the ship's engines hummed to life with a deeper, more powerful sound than the escape craft. "Because that bond I mentioned, it's not just ceremonial, it's biological. And it's going to change both of us in ways neither of our species fully understands." The ship lifted smoothly and slipped out of the asteroid through a hidden exit port. Soon they were away from the sector entirely, jumping to faster-than-light speeds. Jake watched Lyria pilot the ship, her movements confident despite everything. "You said you weren't always a princess sitting in palaces. What did you mean?" She was quiet for a moment, her expression distant. "I spent 5 years in the Imperial military before my cousin decided to use me as a diplomatic pawn. I've seen combat. I've led raids on pirate strongholds. I've done things that would shock the noble families who smile at me during state functions. So why play the princess role? Because I'm still loyal to my empire, even if I disagree with some of its laws." She turned to face him fully. "But that loyalty has limits. And having my own ships hunt me down because a human tried to save my life, that crosses a line. I'm sorry," Jake said, "for grabbing you. For causing this." "Don't be." Lyria's expression softened slightly. "You did what any decent person would do. The fault lies with a system that punishes that." She looked down at her hands, where the glowing patterns were still visible but fading. "Besides, maybe it's time some of our oldest laws were challenged. What exactly is happening to you? To us?" Lyria took a deep breath. "The Sindari evolved with a unique trait. When we bond with another being through direct physical contact, our bodies begin to synchronize on a cellular level. It's an ancient survival mechanism from when my ancestors lived in hostile environments. Bonded pairs could share resources, information, even heal each other." "That sounds useful." "It is. It's also the reason we isolated ourselves genetically. Because bonding with other species creates something new. Something unpredictable." She met his eyes. "The last time a Sindari bonded with an alien was 3,000 years ago. That individual was executed, and all records were sealed." Jake felt a chill. "So we're in uncharted territory. Completely." Lyria pulled up another screen, this one showing biological data that Jake couldn't interpret. "But I've been studying the Forbidden Archives. I know more about this than the Imperial Council thinks I do. That's why they want me dead. I'm not just contaminated. I'm dangerous to their control. Because you know their secrets. Because I know that bonding isn't the disaster they claim it is. It's a source of strength they want to suppress." The ship's navigation system chimed. They were approaching their destination, a massive station that looked like someone had welded together a dozen different ships and habitats into one chaotic structure. "Welcome to Haven Station," Lyria said. "No questions asked, no extradition treaties, and enough firepower to make both our governments think twice about starting trouble." They docked without incident. The station was crowded with beings from dozens of species, all here because they didn't fit into the neat categories their home worlds demanded. Jake felt like he'd stepped into one of the frontier stories he'd read as a kid, except this was real and the stakes were his life. Lyria led him through the bustling corridors to a private suite she'd apparently rented under another fake identity. Once inside, she finally relaxed her guard, slumping into a chair that adjusted automatically to her physiology. "Now what?" Jake asked, standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. "Now we wait for the bond to stabilize." Lyria closed her eyes, and the glow on her skin pulsed once, twice, then faded to almost nothing. "It'll take a few days. In the meantime, we need to figure out who sabotaged that diplomatic vessel and why." You think it's related to us? To the bond? I think it's too convenient to be coincidence. She opened her eyes, and Jake was struck again by how alien and yet how familiar they seemed. Someone knew I would be on that ship. Someone knew you would be there too, and someone set up a situation where we would come into contact. Jake sat down across from her, his mind racing. That's a hell of a conspiracy theory. It's the only thing that makes sense. Lyria leaned forward, her expression intense. Think about it. The timing of the explosions. The fact that the escape pods were all functional except in our section. The way the Imperial Guard ships arrived so quickly, already knowing about the bond. You think someone wants to start a war between Earth and the Sindari Empire, or wants to use us as an excuse to crack down on both sides. Lyria stood and began pacing, her tactical mind clearly working through possibilities. There are factions in my government who oppose this alliance from the start, and I'm sure there are humans who feel the same way. Jake nodded slowly. I heard rumors. Military contractors who didn't want peace cutting into their profits. Politicians who built their careers on fear of aliens. So we have enemies on both sides. A forbidden bond neither of us wanted, and no proof of anything. Lyria stopped pacing and looked at him. We're in a really bad situation, Jake Martinez. Yeah. Jake managed a grim smile. But at least we're alive to be in it. For the first time since the explosion, Lyria laughed. It was a strange sound, musical and slightly off from human laughter, but genuine. You're either very brave or very foolish. My commanding officer always said I was both. Perfect. Lyria moved to a console and began pulling up data feeds. Because we're going to need both qualities to survive what comes next. She brought up news feeds from both human and Sindari sources. The diplomatic vessel's destruction was already being reported, with casualty numbers still uncertain. The official story was a reactor malfunction, but Jake could see the skepticism in the reports. They're going to investigate, he said. Let them. Lyria switched to encrypted channels, her fingers flying across the alien interface. While they investigate the obvious, we'll dig deeper. I have contacts in the intelligence community, people who owe me favors. And I have access codes to human military databases, Jake added. At least, I did before I became a diplomatic fugitive. We'll see if they still work. Lyria gave him an appraising look. You're not what I expected from a human delegate. You're not what I expected from an alien princess. Good. Expectations are predictable, and predictable gets you killed. They worked through the night, station time, piecing together fragments of information. Lyria's contacts confirmed that the Imperial Guard had standing orders to eliminate her on sight. Jake's access code still worked, revealing that Earth's government had declared him a person of interest in the vessel's destruction. We're both wanted now, Jake said, staring at his own face on the human news feeds. Great. Welcome to my world. Lyria brought up a private message that had just come through on her encrypted channel. Her expression darkened as she read it. This is worse than I thought. What? One of my contacts in military intelligence. She says there's been a purge in the Imperial Court. Anyone who supported the alliance with Earth has been arrested or disappeared. Lyria's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just about stopping one diplomatic meeting. Someone is using this as an excuse to consolidate power. Jake felt his stomach sink. The same thing is happening on Earth. I'm seeing reports of investigations into the diplomatic corps. People being accused of accepting bribes from alien sources. A coordinated coup on both sides. Lyria looked at him, and Jake saw fear in those alien eyes. This is bigger than us. This is someone trying to tear down any possibility of peace between our species. Then we need to find out who and stop them. With what resources? We're two fugitives with a handful of credits and a small ship. We have something they don't, Jake said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. We have nothing to lose, and we have each other. Lyria stared at him for a long moment, then she nodded. The bond. You're right. They're afraid of it because they don't understand it. But maybe that's exactly what we need. She held out her hand, palm up. The patterns on her skin began to glow again, faint but growing stronger. The bond works both ways. If we both accept it, we'll be able to sense each other. Know when the other is in danger. Eventually, we might even be able to share thoughts. Jake looked at her offered hand. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was insane. He barely knew this person. She was an alien whose species viewed this bond as an abomination. Taking her hand would make him as much of a fugitive as she was, cut him off from everything he'd known. But the alternative was letting whoever orchestrated this get away with it, letting fear and hatred win, letting the alliance die before it had a chance to live. He reached out and took her hand. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. It felt like every nerve in his body had suddenly connected to hers. He could feel her heartbeat, different rhythm than human but unmistakable. Could sense her fear and her determination and her fierce will to survive. And underneath it all, he felt her surprise that he'd actually done it. The glow spread from her to him, patterns appearing on his own skin. They didn't match hers exactly, but they harmonized with them, like two parts of a song finding their key. "Okay," Jake said, his voice shaking slightly. "That's intense." "It'll get easier," Lyria said, but she sounded uncertain. At least, the archive said it would. They stood there, hands clasped, as the bond settled into something more stable. Jake could still feel her presence at the edge of his awareness, a warm certainty that she was there. "So what now?" he asked. Lyria smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "Now we become something neither of our species has seen in 3,000 years. And we use it to tear down whoever thinks they can control our worlds through fear." "I like the sound of that." "Good." Lyria released his hand, but the sense of connection remained. "Because it's going to be dangerous, probably impossible, and definitely illegal on both our worlds." "Sounds like a normal Tuesday to me," Jake said. Lyria laughed again, that strange musical sound. "I think I'm going to like working with you, Jake Martinez. The feeling's mutual, Your Highness. Just Lyria. If we're bonded, we're equals. Titles don't mean anything here. Just Lyria, then." Jake extended his hand for a more traditional human handshake. "Partners?" She took it without hesitation this time. "Partners." Outside the window, Haven Station rotated slowly against the backdrop of unfamiliar stars, two fugitives from different worlds, bound together by circumstance and a touch that changed everything. Somewhere out there, powerful people were moving pieces on a board they thought they controlled. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The bond pulsed between them, a promise and a challenge. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that made all the difference.